My name is Farhan Maulana. I was born in Jakarta, Indonesia. I am going to tell you something that happened to me. Something I have never been able to fully explain with my own words. Something that changed everything about the way I see this life and the next one. I know that when people hear a story like mine, the first thing they want to do is find a reason not to believe it. I understand that. I was that kind of person too. I was the kind of man who believed only what he could touch, what he could count, what he could measure. If you could not put a number on it, it was not real to me. That was how I lived for most of my life. That was the world I built for myself. A world made of facts and figures and business deals and profit margins. A world where everything had a logical explanation if you just looked hard enough. But I'm going to tell you that there came a day when that world broke apart completely. Not slowly. Not gradually. All at once. In one single moment, everything I believed about life and death and what comes after was torn open like a piece of old cloth. And what I saw on the other side of that tearing was something I was not prepared for. Something no book had prepared me for. Something no imam, no scholar, no teacher in all my years of religious education had ever described to me in the way that I actually experienced it. I want you to sit with me for a little while. I want you to hear this from the beginning. Not from the crash. Not from the moment everything happened. I want you to know who I was before that day, because if you do not know who I was, you will not understand how impossible it was for what happened to happen to a man like me. I was 43 years old. I had built my business from almost nothing. My father was a modest man. He worked hard all his life in a small trading company in Surabaya. He never became rich. He never drove a fancy car or lived in a big house. But he taught me how to work. He taught me that if you wake up before the sun and you stay honest and you never stop learning, then slowly, things will come to you. I took that teaching and I ran with it in a way my father never expected. By the time I was 30, I had my own import and export company. By the time I was 35, I had offices in Jakarta, Singapore, and Kuala Lumpur. By the time I was 40, my company was working with buyers and suppliers across Asia, Europe, and North America. I had a beautiful home in the South Jakarta area. The kind of home that people slow down to look at when they drive past. I had a wife named Siti who had been with me since we were young. We had 2 sons and 1 daughter. My sons were already teenagers. My daughter was 11 years old at the time this story happened. She was the one who used to run to the door every time she heard my car pulling into the compound. She was the one who would grab my briefcase from my hand and carry it inside even though it was heavy for her small arms. She used to say, "Aya, I carried it. That means you owe me something sweet." Every single time. I tell you about her because when I was sitting on that plane, in those final seconds before everything went wrong, the last clear thought I had before all the noise and the fire and the falling was her face. Her small face. Her voice saying, "Aya, I carried it. But I am moving too fast. Let me go back." I was a Muslim man. I had been Muslim my whole life. My family was Muslim. My community was Muslim. I prayed 5 times a day. I fasted during Ramadan. I had done my Hajj. I gave zakat. I did everything that was required of me as a Muslim man. But I want to be honest with you, the way I have been honest with myself since all of this happened. I was doing those things the way a man wears a good suit to an important meeting. Not because the suit means something deep to him, but because it is what you wear. It is what is expected. You put it on, you go, you come home, you take it off. My faith was something I wore. It was not something I felt inside my chest when I was alone. When I prayed, I was going through the motions. When I fasted, I was doing what my culture required. I never sat alone in a room and truly asked God if He was there. I never cried in front of Him. I never told Him the things that were weighing on me. I did not have that kind of relationship with anyone, including God. I was a man who kept things inside and handled things himself. That was how I operated. My business partners used to say about me that I never looked worried even when things were going badly. They thought that was a strength. They thought it meant I was calm and steady. But the truth is I was not calm. I was just closed. I had learned very early in life that showing your fear or your pain only makes people around you nervous, and nervous people make bad decisions. So I trained myself to always look certain even when I was not. I trained myself to look like I had everything under control. That was who I was. A man with everything under control. And then came October. The October that changed everything. The trip to the United States was not unusual for me. I had been making that journey at least 2 or 3 times a year for about 8 years. I had business partners in Chicago. I had buyers in New York. I had meetings in Los Angeles. Long-haul flights were just part of my life. I was so used to being in planes that I could sleep through takeoff and landing without even noticing. My wife used to say that I probably slept more comfortably on a plane than in my own bed. She was not wrong. This particular trip was for a large contract. One of the biggest my company had ever been in position to close. I was going to meet with an American distribution company that wanted to bring some of our Indonesian products into their retail network across multiple states. It was the kind of deal that does not come along very often. The kind of deal that could change the size and the direction of your entire business. I had been preparing for it for months. My whole team had been working on the proposal. My finance director had run the numbers so many times he knew them in his sleep. I had rehearsed the presentation. I knew every question they might ask and I had an answer ready for all of them. I left Jakarta on a Wednesday morning. I flew to Hong Kong first. Then I connected to a flight from Hong Kong heading to Los Angeles. That was the flight. That was the one. I remember the day clearly. I remember the weather in Hong Kong was gray and a little heavy with humidity even for that time of year. I remember the airport was busy. I remember eating a bowl of noodle soup in a small restaurant near my gate because I always ate something before a long flight. I remember the soup was too salty. I remember thinking about the meeting. I remember reading through my presentation notes one more time even though I already knew them by heart. I boarded the plane. It was a wide-body aircraft. The kind used for long international routes. I had a business class seat. Window seat on the left side. I had specifically requested a window seat not because I liked looking at the view but because it meant nobody would be climbing over me during the flight. I always brought earplugs and a sleeping mask. I was planning to sleep for most of the 14-hour flight. I remember the first few hours being completely normal. The kind of nothing that long flights are made of. The humming of the engines. The filtered air that always smells slightly chemical. The distant sound of the cabin crew moving around. I ate dinner. I watched the beginning of a film. I do not even remember what film it was now. Then I put on my mask and my earplugs and I went to sleep. I slept for a long time. When I woke up, I looked at the small screen on the seat in front of me that shows the flight path. We were somewhere over the Pacific. Still hours from Los Angeles. It was the middle of the night over the ocean. I drank some water. I went back to sleep. That is the last normal thing I remember about that flight. The next thing I am aware of is a sound. Not a normal aircraft sound. Not the usual mechanical humming or the sound of air rushing past the fuselage. This was something different. A deep, groaning sound. Like the plane was struggling with something. Like it was trying to hold itself together against something it could not fight. Then the plane dropped. Not a small drop. Not the kind of turbulence that makes your stomach do a small flip. This was a fall. A real fall. The kind of drop that tells your body instantly that this is not normal and that something has gone very, very wrong. My water bottle flew off the tray table. The lights in the cabin flickered. I heard screaming from somewhere behind me. The seatbelt light came on and the tone sounded, but the sound of it was almost lost in the noise that was already filling the plane. I pulled my mask off. I sat up straight. My heart was going very fast. Around me I could see other passengers grabbing for their armrests. A woman 2 seats ahead of me was gripping her child against her body. A man across the aisle looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not just fear. Something past fear. Something that was already beginning to accept something terrible. The plane leveled for a moment. Just a moment. And then the cabin crew got on the intercom. I remember the voice being careful and controlled, but underneath the careful voice I could hear something else. I could hear what they were trying not to say. They told us to remain seated with our seatbelts fastened. They told us we were experiencing severe turbulence. But the words did not match what my body was feeling. And then it happened again. Worse this time. The plane dropped again, and this time when it dropped it did not level out the way it had before. It tilted to one side. Everything that was not fixed down moved. The sounds from the back of the cabin became something I cannot properly describe to you. It was the sound of human beings who had lost all hope of things being okay. Raw sound. The kind that comes out of people when they are past the point of trying to be calm. I grabbed the armrests. I closed my eyes. I do not know why I closed my eyes. It was not a decision. My body just did it. And in that moment, with my eyes closed and the plane tilting and the noise all around me, the thought that came to me was not about the business deal. It was not about my office or my money or any of the things I had spent my life building. The thought was my daughter's face. Her voice. I carried it. Then the plane started going down. I know that is a simple way to describe it. But that is what happened. The nose of the plane started pointing down and the angle kept increasing and the engines were making sounds that engines should not make and the whole cabin was shaking so hard that I could feel my teeth knocking against each other. People were screaming. The oxygen masks dropped from above. I remember putting mine on but my hands were shaking so badly that I had trouble with it. I remember looking out the window beside me and seeing nothing but black ocean. I thought I was going to die. I want to be very direct about that. I thought, this is it. This is the moment. I am going to die over the Pacific Ocean on my way to a business meeting and my daughter is going to carry her father's briefcase and he will not be there to pay her back with something sweet. And then I heard a sound. Right there in the middle of all the other sounds. In the middle of the engines and the screaming and the shaking and the groaning of the aircraft. I heard a sound that was completely different from everything else. It was a sound like nothing I had ever heard before. I cannot tell you exactly what it was like because there is no comparison in normal life. The closest I can come is this. Imagine being completely underwater, deep underwater, where it is very quiet and very still, and then suddenly hearing a voice so clear and so close that it feels like the voice is inside your own chest rather than coming from outside of you. That is the closest I can come. And then I saw light. Not the cabin lights. Not light from outside the window. Light that came from nowhere specific. Light that seemed to come from everything at once. And standing in that light, right there in the middle of a dying aircraft over the Pacific Ocean, was a man. I know how this sounds. I know what you might be thinking right now. I thought the same things later when I was far away from that moment, trying to make sense of it with my rational mind. I thought, maybe it was oxygen deprivation. Maybe the mask was not working properly. Maybe my brain was shutting down and creating things for me to see. I went through all of those explanations very thoroughly. I spent weeks in those explanations. But I was there. And I am telling you what I saw. He was a man. He looked like a man. I cannot tell you his race or his age in the way you might describe a person you passed in the street. There was something about him that made those kinds of measurements feel very small and very beside the point. He was wearing white. The kind of white that does not exist in normal life, the kind of white that seems to produce its own light rather than just reflect it. And he was looking directly at me. Not at anyone else on that plane. Directly at me. He stretched out his hand toward me. I want you to understand what stretching out a hand means when you are on a falling aircraft thousands of feet above the ocean. It is not a normal gesture. It is not a polite offer. It was something so out of place with everything around it that part of me refused to process it as real even while it was happening. The plane was screaming. The world was ending. And this man stood there in white and stretched out his hand toward me in the most calm and unhurried way, as if he had all the time in the world, as if nothing happening around him was of any concern to him at all. I do not know what made me reach back. I do not know if I made a decision to do it or if my hand moved on its own. But I reached. And then there was nothing. No plane. No sound. No ocean below me. No white light. No screaming passengers. Nothing. Just a kind of quiet and darkness that I have no words for. Not frightening darkness. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off. Something else entirely. The darkness of something so large and so complete that the concept of fear does not even fit inside it. And then, slowly, I became aware of ground beneath me. Hard ground. Uneven. I could feel small rocks and dry grass under my fingers. I could feel cold air on my face. I could hear wind. Regular wind. Not the roaring wind of a falling plane. Just quiet, cold wind moving through some open space. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the ground. The sky above me was dark and full of stars. More stars than I normally see because I live in a city where the sky is always a little bit bright from all the lights below. But these stars were the kind you see when there is no city anywhere near you. Clear and cold and countless. I sat up very slowly. My body felt strange. Not injured, exactly, but strange. Like something that had been picked up and set down very carefully. Like I had been handled. I looked around me. I was on a hillside. There was dry grass and low bushes around me. In the far distance I could see some lights, very small, which I eventually understood to be a highway. But near me there was nothing. Just open land and sky and wind. I was alone. Except that I was not quite alone. Because as I sat there on that hillside, my ears still ringing with a silence that came after an impossible noise, I heard a voice. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a voice. Speaking clearly into the night air directly behind where I was sitting. And the voice said, "Follow me. I am the way, the truth, and the life." I turned around very fast. And there was nothing behind me. Just the hillside and the dark sky and the stars. But the voice stayed with me. It did not fade the way sounds fade. It stayed in my chest like something warm that had been placed there. I sat on that hillside for a long time before I could make my legs work. I do not know how long. It might have been an hour. It might have been much longer. The cold was settling into me and I was still in my business class clothes, my dress shirt and my trousers, my socks but no shoes, because I had taken off my shoes to sleep on the flight. I was sitting on an American hillside in my socks with no phone, no wallet, no passport, no idea where I was, no idea how I had gotten there, and the wreckage of the plane I had been on was somewhere I could not yet see. I want to tell you something about those first minutes sitting on that hillside. People later asked me if I was praying, if I turned to God right away. And I want to be honest. I was not praying. I was not thinking about God. I was not thinking about the voice or the man in white or any of what had happened. I was not thinking about any of that at all. I was thinking about one single thing, the way a person in shock thinks about one single thing because their mind can only hold one thing at a time. I was thinking about my daughter's face. That was all. Just her face. Her small, bright face. I carried it. That means you owe me something sweet. I sat there and I thought about her face and I cried. Not little tears. Not the kind of crying a man does when he thinks someone might see him and he is trying to keep himself together. I cried like a child. Loud and without any control. My whole body shaking. All the closed, controlled, careful man that I had been for 43 years just broke completely open on that hillside and poured out into the cold American night. I do not know how long I cried. When I stopped, I felt empty. Not in a bad way. In the way a bottle feels empty after you have poured something out of it that it has been holding too long. I stood up. I started walking toward the distant lights. It took me about 2 hours of walking before I reached a small road. Then another 30 minutes before I reached what appeared to be a small gas station. The man inside the gas station looked at me in a way that made me realize how I must have appeared. A foreign man in dress clothes and socks, no shoes, walking out of the dark in the middle of the night, tear marks on his face, disheveled in every possible way. He called 911. The police came. An ambulance came. And that is when I learned what had happened to the flight I had been on. The plane had gone down. It had hit the ocean approximately 340 kilometers from the California coastline. The rescue operation had already been launched. The survival numbers in those first hours were very bad. The kind of numbers that news reporters say in careful voices because the full weight of those numbers is difficult to speak aloud. When the police officer asked me what flight I had been on and I told him, he looked at his partner with an expression I will never forget. Then he looked back at me and asked me again to confirm the flight number. I confirmed it. He asked me to confirm my seat number. I told him. He asked me how I had gotten to where they found me. And I sat there in the back of that police car wrapped in a blanket they had given me and I told him the truth. I told him all of it. The man in white. The stretched hand. The hillside. The voice. He wrote everything down very carefully. He did not tell me I was wrong or that it was impossible. He just wrote it down the way a person writes things down when they are not sure what category to put them in. They drove me to a hospital. They checked me physically. I had some bruising. I had some minor lacerations on my hands and feet, probably from the hillside ground. I was dehydrated and in shock. But I was alive. I was entirely, completely, physically alive in a way that the people who examined me found very hard to explain when they understood the full situation of what flight I had been on and where the wreckage was and where I had been found. The distance between where the plane hit the ocean and where I was found on that hillside was significant. It was not the kind of distance that makes logical sense in terms of how a person from a crashing aircraft could end up there. I am not going to tell you the exact numbers because I heard different numbers from different people in those days and I do not want to pass on something inaccurate. But I will tell you that every person who reviewed the situation with clear eyes and no agenda to prove or disprove anything had no standard explanation for why I was where I was. I called my wife from the hospital. That call. I do not have words for that call. I found out later that she had already received notification about the flight. She had already been told the early information. She had been sitting at home with my children in a state that no person should ever have to sit in. When she heard my voice on the phone, the sound she made was not a normal sound. It was the sound of something that had been on the edge of breaking, held back only by the need to be strong for the children, and then suddenly, all at once, released. She could not speak for a while. She just kept saying my name. Over and over. Fawn, Fawn, Fawn. Like she needed to confirm that it was real. Like she needed to say it enough times for it to be true. I told her I was okay. I told her I was in a hospital in California. I told her I would explain everything when I got home. I told her the children would need to hear my voice. She put them on the phone one at a time. When my daughter came on the phone, she said nothing for a moment. I could hear her breathing. And then she said, "Aya?" Just that one word. And the way she said it reached through the phone and through the miles of ocean and sky between us and grabbed me somewhere very deep inside. I said, "I am here. I am here, my love. Aya is here." She started crying. But even through her crying I could hear the relief in it. The way relief sounds when it comes after something very close to the worst thing. I stayed in the hospital for 2 days. They monitored me. They ran tests. They asked me many questions, both medical and from the authorities who were handling the investigation into the accident. I answered everything I could. I was cooperative in every way. But the question I could not answer in any satisfying way was the question they kept coming back to. How did you get there? I could only tell them what I told you. And I could see in their faces each time that my answer was not one their systems had a category for. When I was released from the hospital, I did not go to my meeting. Of course I did not. My business partner in Chicago had already heard about the flight and had been in contact with my office in Jakarta. Everyone who knew me had already gone through the same terrible hours of not knowing that my wife had gone through. When they heard I was alive, the relief in those calls and messages was enormous. But I was not well. That is important to understand. Being physically alive and being well are two very different things. My body was in California and it was functioning. But something inside me was not functioning at all. Something inside me had been broken open by what happened on that hillside and it had not closed back up. It was still open. And everything was pouring in through it and I could not control it and I could not close it and I did not know what to do with that. I flew home to Jakarta 2 days after being released from the hospital. The flight home was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Being on a plane again that quickly. Every sound the aircraft made, every small vibration, every shift in air pressure had me gripping the armrests with white knuckles. I did not sleep at all on that flight. I sat completely rigid and watched the flight path map and counted down the hours and minutes until landing with a desperation that felt almost like praying, though I was not sure who I was praying to. When I walked out of the arrival gate at Soekarno-Hatta Airport and saw my wife standing there with my children, I stopped walking. I just stopped. I stood there in the middle of all the people moving around me and I looked at them for a moment before any of them saw me. My wife scanning the crowd. My sons standing beside her, trying to look calm in the way teenage boys try to look calm when they are actually frightened. And my daughter, standing slightly in front of everyone else, turning her head left and right, searching. And then she saw me. She did not run. She walked. Fast, but she walked. And she came straight to me, and she wrapped her arms around my waist, and she pressed her face against my chest, and she did not say anything. She just held on. And I held on. I held on so tight. And I thought about the hillside and the stars and the voice, and I thought, I am here. By something impossible, I am here. That first night home, after the children were in bed and City and I were finally alone in our bedroom, she asked me to tell her everything. Not the version I had been giving to the authorities or the doctors or the questions that were kind but were really asking for a logical explanation. She wanted the real version. She wanted to know what had actually happened. So I told her. All of it. The man in white. The light. The hand. The sudden disappearance of everything around me. Waking on the hillside. The voice. I told her all of it and I watched her face as I told it. She is not a dramatic woman. She listens carefully and thinks before she responds. She did not interrupt me. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Farhan, what do you think it means? I told her I did not know. I told her I was afraid to think about what it meant. I told her that the words I had heard on that hillside were following me everywhere and I could not make them stop and I did not know what to do with them. She asked me what words. I told her, follow me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. She was very still when I said that. She said, those are the words of Isa. And we sat with that in the silence of our bedroom for a long time. In the weeks that followed, I could not go back to work. This is significant if you know me, because I am the kind of man who is usually in his office before the sun is fully up and who rarely leaves before the evening. Work is not just what I do, it is what I am made of. But after I came home from America, I could not make myself care about any of it. My finance director would send me reports and I would look at the numbers and I would think, there was a man in white. I would sit in a meeting and my team would be talking about a deal and I would think, he stretched out his hand toward me. I would try to read a contract and instead I would hear the voice again, clear and close, the way it had been on the hillside. Follow me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. My family were worried. My business partners were worried. Everyone could see that something had changed, but nobody knew exactly what had changed or what to do about it. My doctors said I was experiencing post-traumatic stress, which is normal for someone who survives a serious accident. He recommended a therapist. He gave me some medication for sleep because I was not sleeping well. I took the medication. I went to the therapist twice. The therapist was a kind man, well-trained and careful. But the thing he kept doing was offering me explanations. He would listen to what I described and then he would say, what you experienced is known as this or it is similar to that. It was like trying to hand me a small box to put an ocean inside of. I stopped going to the therapist after the second session. I went instead to my mosque, to the imam who had led prayers there for many years. He was an educated man, a man I respected. I told him everything, the way I had told my wife, the full version without any cleaning up. I wanted to hear what he would say. He listened very carefully. When I finished, he sat with it for a moment. Then he said that what I had experienced was a trial from Allah. That Allah had tested me with this near-death experience and that what I saw were the workings of my own frightened mind, not a real vision. He said the words I heard were perhaps words I had encountered somewhere before and that in my state of extreme fear my mind had produced them. He said the important thing was that I was alive and that I should thank Allah for my life and return to my prayers with greater sincerity. He was kind. Well, I'm sure of that. But as he spoke I felt something in me pulling back from his words. Not angrily. Not with argument. Just quietly pulling back, the way a person pulls back from something that does not quite fit them, though they cannot fully explain why. I left the mosque that day and I sat in my car in the parking area for a very long time. The words were still there. Still warm in my chest. Follow me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I started reading. That was the thing I found I could do when I could not do anything else. I started reading everything I could find about near-death experiences. About the accounts of people who had come close to dying and had come back with something they could not explain. I read books written by doctors and scientists. I read accounts written by ordinary people. I read religious texts. I read theology. I read in Indonesian and in English and in anything I could access. What I found was that my experience was not unique in every detail. Many people who nearly die report seeing figures of light. Many report experiences of being moved through space. Many report voices. The scientific community has explanations for some of these things. Neurological events. The brain under extreme stress. Oxygen deprivation. I read all of those explanations carefully and with genuine openness. But then I would come back to one specific thing. The location. The hillside. The distance. That part had no explanation. That part remained stubbornly in the category of things that should not have been possible and yet clearly were. And then there was something else I found in my reading. Something I was not looking for. The words. Follow me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I found them in the Bible. In the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I read that verse and I sat completely still. I read it again. And again. And again. Those were the exact words. The exact words. I am not a man who has spent a lot of time reading the Bible. I had read small parts of it over the years, the way an educated person reads texts from various traditions to understand them better. But I did not know that verse. I did not know it was there. It was not something I had stored in my memory from my religious education. I had not heard it preached from any pulpit I had ever sat in. And yet those were the words I had heard. On the hillside. In the dark. Exactly those words that I put the book down. I got up from my desk and I walked to the window and I stood there looking out over the garden. My daughter was playing outside. She was chasing something, a butterfly or a lizard, I could not tell from where I stood. She was laughing. The sound of her laughing came through the glass, muffled but real. I thought, something happened to me. Something real. Not a brain event. Not a fear response. Something real happened to me over the Pacific Ocean and on that hillside, and the thing that happened to me was not random and it was not meaningless. That was the moment the real fear began. Not fear of death. I had already been afraid of death on the plane and that fear had passed. This was a different kind of fear. This was the fear of a person standing on the edge of something enormous. The fear of understanding that everything you thought you knew, everything your whole life has been organized around, everything your community and your family and your culture have told you is true, might be a very small piece of a much larger reality that you have never properly looked at. I was afraid of what I might find if I kept looking. I was afraid of what it would mean for my life, for my family, for my reputation, for everything. I was afraid of the cost. But I could not stop. I began reading the Bible more carefully. I obtained a proper translation, a good one recommended to me by a friend who had encountered it in his academic studies. I started from the beginning, but I kept coming back to the Gospels. To the accounts of Jesus, the man I had seen. The man who had reached out his hand to me in the wreckage of a falling aircraft and pulled me through to the other side of death. The Jesus in those pages was not the Jesus I had been told about in my religious education. I had been taught about Isa, the prophet, the messenger, the one who came before Muhammad, respected but positioned carefully within a hierarchy of revelation. But the Jesus in those pages was something else. He was not careful. He was not positioned. He spoke in a way that no ordinary prophet speaks. He forgave sins, which is something only God can do. He claimed to be the Son of God. He said things like, before Abraham was, I am. He said things that made the people around him pick up stones because what he was saying was either the truth of something far beyond human experience, or the claim of a madman. I read about his death. About the crucifixion. About the way they killed him. About the darkness that covered the land when he died. I read it all and I felt something in my chest the whole time I was reading. Something I could not name exactly. Something that was very close to recognition. I read about the resurrection. I read the accounts of the people who saw him alive after he had died. I read Paul's letter to the Corinthians where Paul lists the people who saw the risen Jesus, hundreds of people, and I thought about the fact that Paul wrote this letter at a time when many of those witnesses were still alive, still available to confirm or deny it. He was not writing about something he could hide behind distance or death. He was making a claim that could be checked. I read about Thomas. Thomas who doubted. Thomas who said, "Unless I see in his hands the marks of the nails and place my finger into the marks of the nails and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." And then Jesus appeared to Thomas, and what he said to Thomas was not an argument or a sermon or a point-by-point defense of the resurrection. He just said, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Put your hand here and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve but believe." I read those words and I felt something break open in my chest again. The same feeling I had had on the hillside. Something opening. I was a Thomas. I was exactly a Thomas. A man who lived by evidence. A man who trusted what he could verify. A man who had been shown something he could not explain away and who was standing at the edge of believing it. I kept coming back to the words. The ones on the hillside. Follow me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Not, look at me. Not, think about me. Not, study me carefully and consider whether I am worth your attention. Follow me. An active word. A word that requires movement. A word that requires leaving where you are and going somewhere new. I was afraid of that word. Follow. Because following meant losing something. Losing the position I had in my community. Losing the certainty of being understood by the people around me. Losing the religious identity I had carried my whole life, not deeply, not sincerely, but carried nonetheless. It was still mine. And trading it for something this enormous, this strange, this completely outside the bounds of what everyone around me would understand, was a price I did not know if I could pay. But I also kept thinking about this. I had been on that plane. I had been in those final seconds when the plane was going down and there was no question of survival. And something had reached into those seconds and pulled me out of them. Something had wanted me to survive. Something had gone to the trouble of bringing me to a hillside in California and speaking words into the night air so that I would hear them and carry them and find them eventually in a book and understand that they were not accidental. Something wanted something from me. And the something it wanted was expressed in that one word. Follow. It was 4 weeks after I came home from the hospital that I had a dream. I want to be clear that this was different from the experience on the plane. The experience on the plane was not a dream. I was awake. I was fully conscious. Everything I described to you about the man in white and the light in the hand, that was not a dream. I was conscious through all of it. But this, for weeks later, was a dream. In the dream I was standing in a very wide open space. It was not any place I recognized. There was bright light everywhere. The same quality of light as I had seen on the plane. Light that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. And in the dream, the same man was standing before me. The man in white. Except that in the dream I could see his face more clearly. His eyes were looking at me with an expression I do not have an adequate word for. Not kind exactly, though there was kindness in it. Not powerful exactly, though there was enormous power in it. The best word I can get close to is certain. He looked at me with complete certainty. Not the way a man looks certain because he has considered all the options and decided. The way something looks certain because it simply is what it is. The way the sun is certain that it is the sun. He did not speak in the dream. He just looked at me. And I looked back at him. And in that looking, in the dream, I understood something that I cannot fully translate into regular words. But I will try. I understood that he already knew everything about me. Not just the surface things. Not just my name and my business and my family. Everything. Every closed door inside me. Everything I had ever done that I was ashamed of. Every way I had been less than what I should have been. Every prayer I had said without meaning it. Every person I had been too busy for when they needed me. He knew all of it. And he was not turning away. He was still looking at me with that same certainty. Still standing there with complete knowledge of who I was and what I had done and had not done. Still reaching. I woke up at 4 a.m. My face was wet. I had been crying in my sleep. I sat up in bed. My wife was asleep beside me. The room was dark and quiet. I sat there in the dark for a while. Then I got up and went to my study. I sat at my desk. I opened the Bible to the Gospel of John. I read chapter 3. The part about Nicodemus, the religious leader who came to Jesus at night, privately, because he did not want others to see him. I found that story very close to my situation. A man of some position and reputation who came to Jesus in the dark because the daylight felt too risky, who had questions he could not ask in front of everyone else. And Jesus said to Nicodemus, "You must be born again, not of water only, but of the Spirit." I sat with that for a long time. Then I read John chapter 4, the woman at the well. Jesus speaking to a woman who had her own complicated history, her own things she would have preferred to keep private. And he named those things. He knew them without being told. And she went back to her village and said, "Come and see a man who told me all the things I had ever done. Could this be the Messiah?" I read John chapter 6. The feeding of 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. People fed until they were full with 12 baskets left over. I thought about abundance. About the nature of a God who, when he provides beyond the requirement. I had been provided for. I was a living man who should not have been living. I had been provided for beyond the requirement. I read all night. When the sky began to get light and I could hear the city starting its day outside, I closed the book. I sat for a long time in the growing light. Then I bowed my head. Not in the direction of Mecca. Not in the posture of Islamic prayer that I had practiced my whole life. I bowed my head in the simple way of a man sitting at his desk who has run out of arguments and has only himself to offer. And I spoke. Quietly, so as not to wake anyone. Out loud, because this felt like something that needed to be out loud. I said, "I don't fully understand everything. I have questions I don't have answers to. I am afraid of what following you will cost. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know that you knew my name over the Pacific Ocean when nobody else could reach me. And I am asking you now, the way you asked me, I am asking you to help me find you. I want to follow. I don't fully know how. But I want to follow." That was my prayer. Simple and frightened and full of things I still did not understand. But it was real. It was the first prayer I had ever prayed in my life that was completely real from first word to last. Something changed after that morning. Not everything changed at once. My life did not suddenly become simple or easy. Following Jesus, I would learn, is not a transaction where you say the words and then receive a comfortable and uncomplicated life. It is a relationship. It is a walk. And walks have difficult terrain. But something settled in me. The restlessness that had been driving me since the night on the hillside, the weeks of lying awake and reading and arguing with myself and feeling like I was standing on a ledge about to fall, that settled. Not into certainty about everything. I still had questions. I still had fears. But into something quieter and steadier underneath all of it. I began looking for a community. This was not easy in Jakarta. I was a Muslim man from a Muslim family in a country that is the largest Muslim majority nation in the world. Christianity exists in Indonesia. I want to be very clear about that. There are millions of Indonesian Christians. There are churches. There is a long history of Christian presence in the country. But for a man in my position, a man of public business standing in a Muslim community, moving toward a church was not a small thing. It was a visible thing. It was a thing that would be noticed and talked about and that would have consequences. I found a small church. I went on a Sunday morning very early, before I could change my mind. I sat in the back. I did not introduce myself to anyone. I just sat and listened. The pastor that morning was speaking from the Gospel of Mark. About Jesus healing a blind man. I sat in that pew and I listened and I felt, for the first time since I had been home from America, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I went back the following week. And the week after that. On the third week, the pastor noticed me. Not in a dramatic way. After the service he walked to the back where I was sitting and introduced himself and said simply, "I am glad you are here." He did not ask me anything. He did not push me. He just said he was glad. I started meeting with him privately. These were long conversations. He was a patient man and a careful one. He did not try to argue me into anything. He listened to my story, the full story, with the same quality of attention my wife had given it. He asked questions that helped me think. He helped me understand the things in the Bible that I was finding difficult. He helped me understand the theology of what Jesus had claimed about himself and what that claim meant for the rest of everything. He also helped me with the question I was dreading most. The question of telling my family. My wife was the first person I told about the church. She already knew about everything else, the vision on the plane, the voice on the hillside, the weeks of reading and praying. She had been watching me change from very close up. She had not tried to stop me or redirect me. She had watched with a kind of careful love, the way you watch someone go through something you cannot go through for them but that you want to support however you can. When I told her I had been going to church, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me what I believed now. I told her, carefully and honestly. I told her about Jesus and about what I believed he was and what I believed he had done for me, first on the plane and then in a much larger and more permanent way that I was still learning to understand. She cried. Not angrily. Not in a way that felt like rejection. In a way that felt like she was taking in something enormous and did not know yet what shape it would settle into. We talked for a long time that night. We have talked many times since then about all of it. My wife is a person of sincere faith. Her faith means something real to her, not the way mine had been before but genuinely. What I was bringing to her was not a small thing. I want to be honest about the difficulty of it. I am not going to tell you that she immediately understood and joined me and that everything was simple. Real life is not like that. But I will tell you that she was with me. Even in the difficulty of it, she was with me. Even when she did not fully understand, she was with me. We are still together. We are still walking through all of it together, the questions and the difficulties and the things that do not yet have clear answers. That is a grace I do not take lightly. Telling my wider family was harder. My mother was still alive at that time. She was an old woman, devout in the quiet, everyday way of a generation that did not intellectualize faith but simply lived it. When I told her what had happened to me and what I now believed, the expression on her face was one of the harder things I have experienced in the aftermath of all of this. Not anger. Something sadder than anger. A kind of confusion and loss that I did not have a way to fix quickly, and that I had to sit with over a long time. My brothers were more direct in their opposition. They wanted explanations. They wanted arguments they could answer. They used every argument available, the standard ones about how what I had experienced was a trauma response, about how Christianity is a Western religion, about the completeness of the message of Islam, about the danger to the family reputation and the business. I listened to all of it. I did not argue back. I had already had all of those arguments with myself. I simply told them what I had seen and what I had heard. I told them that I had not gone looking for this. That I had not been unhappy with my faith and gone searching for an alternative. That I had been a man sitting in a business class seat on his way to close a deal, and something had reached into my ordinary life and torn it completely open. I told them I could not unlearn what I had learned. I could not unsee what I had seen. I could not unhear the voice on the hillside. Some of them came around, slowly over time. Some of them have not. There is still distance in some of those relationships that was not there before. That is a cost. I want to name it clearly because I think sometimes people tell these stories as if following Jesus means all your problems dissolve and all your relationships mend and everything becomes beautiful. That has not been my full experience. There are real costs. There are real losses. Following costs something. But I also want to name what I have found. I want to be equally clear about that. I have found something I did not know I was missing. A real relationship with a God who is not just a set of requirements to be fulfilled but a person, if I can use that word, a being who knows my name and knows my face and went over the Pacific Ocean to find me when I was falling. Something personal in the way that nothing in my religious life had ever been personal before. I have found a kind of peace that does not require everything to be going well in order to exist. This is very different from what I had before. Before, I felt stable when things were stable and I felt unstable when things were not. My sense of okayness was completely dependent on circumstances. What I have found since is something underneath the circumstances. Something that stays when everything else moves. I do not have a better description than that. I have found meaning in my work that was not there before. Not because the work itself has changed but because my understanding of why I am here has changed. I used to work in order to build something. To grow the numbers. To make my name larger. Now I work because I understand myself to be here for a purpose that has nothing to do with how big my company gets, And that understanding makes the work lighter and more interesting rather than heavier. I have found brothers and sisters I did not know I had. The pastor who first welcomed me to his church has become one of the most important people in my life. The community I have slowly become part of, carefully, because my situation requires care, has given me something I did not have before. People who know the real story and are walking alongside me in it. And I have found a different relationship with the people I love. This is perhaps the most personal of all to speak about, but it is also the most true. I told you that I was a closed man. A man who kept things inside and handled things himself and never showed fear or pain because that was weakness. That man has been slowly changing. I am still not a man who talks easily about what is inside. That is not something that changes quickly when it has been built over 40 years. But I am more open than I was. I have wept in front of my wife in ways I never did before. I have sat with my daughter and told her that I love her in words, not just in buying things for her, not just in the briefcase game, but in actual words said out loud because words matter and people need to hear them. She is older now, my daughter. She is 14. Last year she asked me to tell her the full story of the plane crash. Not the newspaper version. The real version. I told her everything, the way I have told you. She sat very still through the whole thing. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "So someone went all the way up there to get you and bring you back?" She said, "That must have been a very important person." I said, "I believe he is the most important person there has ever been." She nodded slowly, the way 14-year-olds nod when they are taking something in and not ready to say what they think about it yet. And then she reached over and took my hand and held it for a while. We sat like that for a long time without speaking. I want to say one more thing before I close this account. I want to say it specifically to anyone who is reading this and who comes from the same background I come from. A Muslim background. A community where the idea of following Jesus is not just a religious choice but a social and cultural and family matter with serious consequences. I want to speak directly to you. I know the cost. I am not speaking to you from a distance about something I have not felt. I know what it means to see confusion and loss in your mother's eyes. I know what it means to feel distance from brothers you grew up with. I know what it means to have to navigate your public life with great care because the truth of what you believe is something that not everyone around you is safe to know. I know all of that. And I am telling you that what I found on the other side of the cost is worth it. I am not telling you this in a salesman way. I am not trying to sell you something. I am telling you the way a person who has been somewhere tells you what it is like there. You can choose not to believe me. You can find all the same arguments against it that I found against it when I was arguing with myself. I cannot answer all of those arguments for you. I could not fully answer them for myself. There came a point where I stopped needing to answer all of them, because underneath all the unanswered questions there was something so solid and so real that I could stand on it even while the questions remained open. That solid thing is this. Someone reached into a falling aircraft and pulled me out of it. Someone brought me to a hillside and spoke words to me that turned out to be found in a book that he wrote through other people's hands 2,000 years before I was born. Someone knew my name and my face when the Pacific Ocean was below me and there was nobody left to call for help. That is what happened to me. And whatever it costs to follow the person who did that, it is not more than I owe him. Follow me, he said. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am following. I am still learning how. I am still asking questions. I am still working out what it means for every part of my life. But I am following. My name is Farhan Maulana. I am a businessman from Jakarta, Indonesia. I am a father and a husband and a son. I am a man who was on a plane that went into the Pacific Ocean and came out the other side on a hillside in California because someone decided that my story was not finished yet. And that someone has a name. I know his name now. And I am going to spend whatever time I have left on this earth learning what it means to walk in the direction he is calling me.